All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving into some seriously thought-provoking material.
Yeah, this one is going to be a wild ride.
We're cracking open Antonio Tomahawk, Tony Lorenzo's book, We the People Have Been Poisoned.
It's a powerful book.
It is, and it's making some pretty big waves. I mean, Lorenzo's central claim is pretty explosive.
Oh yeah, he's not pulling any punches.
He's arguing that certain corporations are intentionally, well, they're basically poisoning specific communities with a hidden ingredient in their products.
And the ingredient is, well, rat poison.
Yeah, rat poison.
You heard that right?
Not exactly what you want to see in the ingredient list of your shampoo or lotion, right?
Not at all. And what's so compelling about Lorenzo's work is that he doesn't just throw this accusation out there, he backs it up with a really impressive blend of evidence.
Yeah, he's got historical research, personal anecdotes from people who believe they've been affected, and scientific data.
It's a really well-researched book.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you set the stage for us? What exactly is this so-called rat poison ingredient, and where are we finding it?
Okay, so the chemical we're talking about is called coumarin.
Coumarin.
And you can find it in a surprisingly wide range of everyday products, like
Right.
hair products, lotions, perfumes, you name it.
Really?
Now here's the thing. Coumarin does occur naturally in some plants,
Oh, like cinnamon, right?
exactly like cinnamon. But the version that's used in these products is synthetic.
So there's a difference.
Yeah, there's a big difference. And get this, it was originally developed as a rodenticide.
Now, come on. What is a rodenticide?
It's a fancy word for rat poison.
No way. So you're telling me that something that's banned from the food we eat is perfectly fine to put on our skin?
Well, that's exactly what Lorenzo is challenging us to think about.
Yeah.
And he argues that even in small doses, this synthetic coumarin can have some pretty devastating effects on your health.
Especially with repeated exposure over time.
Absolutely.
Now, Lorenzo actually kicks off his book with a pretty powerful story about a friend of his who used a popular hair product for years. And she ended up experiencing significant hair loss and other health problems.
That's awful.
It is, and it turns out this product contained coumarin.
Wow.
Can you talk about how insidious something like this can be?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most challenging things about coumarin is that the symptoms of exposure can be really subtle.
Yeah.
They're often misdiagnosed or mistaken for something else. It's really hard to connect the dots and realize that a product you're using every day could be slowly poisoning you.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It really is. You think you're doing something good for yourself, but it turns out it's actually harming you.
Okay, so how does a chemical go from being rat poison to an ingredient in our everyday products?
That's a great question. Let's take a trip back in time to the 1930s.
Right.
Back then, farmers were noticing that their livestock were dying from eating moldy sweet clover.
Interesting.
And scientists discovered that the culprit was coumarin.
So that's where it all started.
Yep. And from there, they were able to synthesize coumarin and turn it into warfarin, which is one of the most widely used rat poisons today.
Wow, that's wild. It seems like there's a real disconnect between what we know about this chemical and how it's being used.
You got that right.
I mean, if it's dangerous enough to be banned from food, why is it allowed in the products we put on our bodies?
That's the million-dollar question Lorenzo wants us to grapple with. And to understand the potential dangers, we need to understand how coumarin actually works in the body.
Let's get into the science then. How does this stuff affect us?
Okay, so coumarin is what's known as a vitamin K antagonist.
The vitamin K antagonist.
Yeah, basically it interferes with your blood's ability to clot. And you might think, well, I don't really plan on getting any major cuts anytime soon. But it's not that simple.
Right.
Even small cuts could become serious issues if your blood can't clot properly.
I see.
And over time, this disruption can cause a whole cascade of other problems.
Lorenzo really doesn't sugarcoat the potential consequences of coumarin exposure.
No, he doesn't. He describes some pretty alarming symptoms. Things like unexplained bruising, excessive bleeding from minor cuts or scrapes, frequent nosebleeds.
Oh, wow.
And even internal bleeding, which can obviously be extremely dangerous.
That's terrifying.
And the scariest part is these aren't just short-term issues. Lorenzo also links coumarin to long-term damage, like liver problems, cell death, and even an increased risk of certain cancers.
That's a pretty serious indictment of this seemingly harmless ingredient.
It is, and it raises some major questions about why it's still allowed in so many products.
Exactly. And speaking of serious questions, Lorenzo also makes a pretty disturbing claim about these products containing coumarin. He's suggesting that they're being intentionally marketed towards Black Americans.
Right.
Is there any evidence to back up this claim?
This is where things get really interesting and controversial. Lorenzo connects the history of eugenics.
Eugenics.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that.
It was a movement that aimed to control who could reproduce, essentially trying to engineer a so-called superior race.
Wow.
It's a really dark chapter in human history.
It sounds like it. And so Lorenzo is suggesting that there are echoes of this thinking in how certain communities are targeted today.
Precisely. He argues that while eugenics is largely discredited today, its legacy still lingers, especially when you look at issues like reproductive health and access to health care.
I can see where he's going with this, but it's a pretty heavy accusation to make.
It is. And Lorenzo doesn't shy away from it. He presents a theory that certain industries actually benefit from maintaining a cycle of poor health in specific communities.
So he's saying there's a financial incentive to keep these communities sick.
That's the gist of it. He points to the pharmaceutical industry as a prime example. The sicker people are, the more medication they need, the more money these companies make.
And Lorenzo also cites some pretty shocking statistics in his book about health disparities.
Oh yeah, she does.
Can you share some of those with us?
For example, he highlights the fact that Black women have significantly higher rates of certain health problems,
Like
fibroids, endometriosis, and certain types of cancer compared to other demographic groups. And he suggests that these higher rates of illness could be linked to prolonged exposure to chemicals like coumarin.
and that these same health problems often lead to expensive medical treatments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Surgeries, long-term medication, all of which contribute to the profits of the pharmaceutical industry.
It's a pretty vicious cycle.
It is, and it's one that Lorenzo believes is being perpetuated intentionally.
It's a lot to digest, I have to say, and it does raise some serious concerns.
Yeah, this is definitely heavy stuff.
If Lorenzo is right, it paints a pretty bleak picture.
It does. It really makes you wonder about the systems we're all participating in.
And if we're all just pawns in some larger game.
That's a deep question, and one that Lorenzo's book really forces us to confront.